Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday night special guests. Tonight's class is sponsored Lila Nishmas, Bilha Bas Devorah Abraham, as well as we mentioned last night. Today is the first yard site of Hershel Shmuel of blessed memory, Ben Yabod L'chaim Tevim Maruchim, Shmaryahu, Shammai Shmaryahu. As the Shama should have an aliyah, we should be reunited with the coming of Mashiach now. We're joined tonight by a very special guest, a local, but he's not only here to talk about local Chicago things, Rabbi Chaplain David Grossman, who's here on behalf of the Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy. He is the chaplain. And last week, as I mentioned, we had a mental health training as well as a first aid training. And David was so nice to come and it was so interesting. So I thought, hey, let's get him on here and talk about his chaplaincy. So first and foremost, David, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Great. So tell us about this organization called the Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy. What is it? How did it start? And take us.
So Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy is something that was kind of developing over the last 8 years. 8 years ago, when my youngest son got involved in Civil Air Patrol, it's the Air Force Auxiliary. It's a civilian auxiliary of the Air Force. And he got involved, so I stayed with him. And then I started, I got more and more involved myself as a chaplain with the Air Force Auxiliary. And that kind of led from one thing to another. I started, every time I show up in uniform someplace, the Jews come and self-identify. They start to stand up, when you show up there. And so that gave me the idea to start connecting with veterans in a slow way. But right before when the pandemic began, so I had a day job and that closed. It was in the senior housing industry and that no one was moving at that time. So that closed up, and all of a sudden the next day I turned around and opened up the Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy full time to stay focused on Jewish American veterans.
So what is the method? How do you get in touch with them? Is this something that the military is cooperative with, supportive of, or are you completely independent?
So completely independent. We're a nonprofit agency. We've are dependent on donations and everything else like any other Chabad institution. But the connections are made because when I show up in uniform, someone says hello. In fact, I just got back from a 9-day summer encampment at the Marcellus Training Center down in Southern Illinois. And we had 120 cadets that I was taking, I was chaplain for while I was there. And 2 more people stepped up and they, and identified. One said, I'm Jewish and wanted to talk, and we visited. Another person was talking about, how her mother was Jewish.
We've all heard that story before.
So we connected on that one too. And now they're on my mailing list and we send them matzahs and stuff like that, keeping in touch. But I started interviewing veterans. There's a thing called Joseph Campbell did a work on the hero's journey, and it talks about the different steps of the hero's journey. There's a pattern language to this. So I use that pattern language to interview veterans to find out what was life like before, what enticed you to join the military, what was a time when you realized this is not Kansas anymore, Dorothy, and gather their stories. And everyone has got a very fascinating story. And so we have a YouTube channel, Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy, and we kind of share short vignettes of veteran stories on YouTube. But each time we start, there's always, one veteran knows another veteran who knows another veteran, and the list continues to pile. And because they all know how to use Zoom now, yes, there's a number of people that in the Chicagoland area, but our list goes across the country now because they all know how to do Zoom.
So is your clientele active duty, retired, men, women, Air Force, Army, Navy, Coast Guard? What's the makeup of your customer base?
So as an Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy, it's all about veterans. And of course, as soon as you are in the military, you automatically become a veteran. But our focus is those who have left active service and, working with them. And we do the typical Chabad House things. I have a JLI class on Wednesday night. We do, locally, we do a bagels and brunch and tefillin thing on Sundays every 6 weeks or so. So we do the typical things. But the focus with the veterans is really the focus. Now, that does not mean I don't do active duty. They join the JLI classes as well. I've had active duty members, reach out and schedule a time to talk with me because of their the stress that they're dealing with. I have someone who was, he's active duty, doing college at the same time, and he's trying to become more and more observant and religious. And he scheduled a time to talk about how do you juggle all of this. But also Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, last year, this year, I'm going out to Fort Hood to be the chaplain there to do the services there. I was up in North Dakota at Minot Air Force Base for Sukkot last year to do services there. So yes, we do active service members, but our focus in Sioux Jewish Chaplaincy is on the veterans.
So in the stories that you meet of guys, let's say active duty or veterans, and if you've noticed a change, what's it like to be a Jewish soldier, airman, Navy, whatever it is? What is their experience? Is there any commonality? And is it different than somebody who was in the military in, I was going to say last decade, last century, 20 years ago, 40 years ago? Is it a similar experience? Is it one size fits all? Is there something nuanced? And of course, one of the things that immediately comes up is what's it like for these kids as far as dealing with a culture that is at best unaware, potentially hostile to Jewish ideas and Jewish Rosh Hashanah and Jews in general? Have they encountered anti-Semitism? Have you developed any kind of sense as to what those veterans are experiencing now, current active duty and guys from the past?
Absolutely. So I showed up at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs a couple of years ago in uniform, and within 5 minutes, someone came up and introduced himself and said, "Hello, Rabbi." I mean, I stand out, with a beard and uniform. And we started talking. He was one of the first people I interviewed. He was the Air Force Academy graduating class in 1959.
Oh, wow.
The first graduating class. And his first year at the academy, automatically everyone goes to services Sunday morning. And yes, you will go to church services Sunday morning like everyone else. This is the military. You do what everybody does. So 6 months later, they kind of eased up on that, and he didn't have to go. We had to march with them to the chapel, and then he was dismissed. But then, he's the only one in the barracks. The second year, they started having a Jewish chaplain on base, and now they could have Friday night services instead of Sunday morning services. And that was really funny because you get to go whichever service you want to. So a lot of other academy cadets who went to the Friday night Jewish services so they could sleep in Sunday morning.
I thought they had better food.
But yeah, so there's different stories. Typically enlisted feel the anti-Semitism more than the officers do. The officers are more educated. It's kind of a different breed. But to give you an idea, Zev Elias, his parents are Holocaust survivors, and he wanted to go to medical school. And of course, he couldn't afford medical school at that time. So he joined the Air Force in order to be able to get his medical degree. While he was serving down in Texas, he was a trauma 1 neurosurgeon for 38 years. So he's seen a lot of stuff, trauma 1 neurosurgeon. And he saw when we went into South America at some point, there was a SEAL team that brought back one of their guys to Texas that needed immediate surgery. And when Zev talks about it, it's palpable, the feeling he has about the achdus, the unity of the team, the SEAL team, how they're truly, the brotherhood between them is really, really palpable. And he said that was really, really moving for him. And even now, when he tells the story, he kind of chokes up on it. But then he juxtaposition when he was out of the service and he was serving in a regular trauma center, I think New Jersey, but I'm not sure. In comes somebody they wheel in somebody for surgery with a huge neo-Nazi swastika tattooed on his chest. And obviously Zev, his parents are Holocaust survivors. So this is, but there are ethics, there are a lot of things that ran through his head, but there are medical ethics.
Talk about trauma.
Right. So he just leaned down into the guy's ear and said, "Don't you worry, these Jew boys are going to take really good care of you." But another story, Jerry Novak, also Air Force. And he was, when he was very young, he was stationed at the Panhandle of Florida. And
What year are we talking? The 50s, 60s, 80s?
This is going to be 60s. Yeah. And he was in the Panhandle in Florida, and the commander on base was excited to learn that this is a Jewish guy. So Jerry thought, this guy likes diversity, like I like diversity. I like to learn about all kinds of different cultures, get a good feel for it. That's, but when he finally actually met the colonel said, "Oh, no, I just want to get to know you, because the more I know about you, the more I understand Jesus." Yeah, that's not about diversity.
Okay, but it wasn't dramatic or traumatic. So you're dealing with these veterans and you reach out to them. What is life like for a veteran, let's say someone who's post-military? Do they still have a loyalty to the military? Is that still something? Is it like maybe somebody is very devoted to their alma mater, or it's just part of their past back in the days of the draft? It's what you did. They don't think about it anymore. Or is there a spectrum?
Yeah. So without fail, every one of them, those years were very much framed the rest of their life experiences. You're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're going to the service, and it doesn't matter if they were guys who went to Vietnam and they were, boots on the ground in the war, or if they were the guy who was a dental assistant serving in Germany for 2 years during peacetime. It doesn't matter. The fact that let me pause for a second, go back. When the Rebbe started talking about the importance of chaplaincy to prisons and to military, it's because these two folks cannot speak up for themselves. Prisoners, because they lost all their rights. Military, because they signed away their rights. They are government property. They are owned. I currently have one son in the Air Force and one son in the Marine Corps. And, no, they don't get to come home for a family wedding. Sometimes they get permission, sometimes they don't, depending on what their schedule is. It's not up to them. So, when you gave up your life to a cause that was bigger than you are, and that dedication to the cause, it formulates the rest of your life. And I think as Jews, we get that sense more than other people would normally get it, because we give up Sabbath and we give up, dining anywhere we want and all these other things we give up. And people look at us and they make a judgment call about us without even knowing us, because we're committed to something that's greater, and we don't miss the other things, because we're answering to a higher calling. And the veterans, for sure, every one of them, they have that same sense that they were responding to a bigger call than themselves, and it frames their life. I was talking with someone recently in an interview, and he was a psychiatrist, and he had a deferment from the Vietnam draft in order to finish his medical degree. And then he came into the service, and he was hoping to serve in the Air Force and to go see the world, go abroad. And of course, he got stationed in the Army, and he went to Indiana.
That's like a foreign country.
But people asked him, did he end up going to Vietnam? And his answer was no, Vietnam came to him, because he, as a psychiatrist, he was dealing with the aftermath of people coming back from Nam. And he was telling me about, the work he did with people with PTSD, and being able to take them back to the trauma, but in a safe environment, to revisit that trauma and then be able to reframe it and come away from that. And how important that was. And he went on to talk about, in his private practice, he started doing multiple personality therapy long before that became a popular thing with the movie Sybil and stuff like that. He started dealing with those things, and he was sharing with me, that he did the same thing he did with veterans, is take them back, and one person had 17 personalities he worked through with that person the same way. So interestingly enough, he said to me afterwards that it was only in the interview, in the conversation we had, that he realized the impact that those years in the military had made on his entire future practice. And that oftentimes happens when we're doing interviews and having these conversations, as they kind of reflect back and see, wow, those 2 or 3 years really impacted everything I did.
You talked about soldiers come to you, they ask you how to handle their situations. Can you share with us what are some uniquely Jewish Hasidus insights that you have found have really resonated with this particular population? Something that you're able to share with them that some other friend or therapist wouldn't have in their toolbox for them?
Well, one of just a funny one in active duty, actually, a story that happened last year. So I'm on a WhatsApp chat with active service members across the Department of Defense, so every branch, right? And it's just used in the department. And someone posted, I'm eastbound across the Pacific, and I crossed the international date line Saturday night at 11 p.m. I'm going from Shabbos right into Shabbos. What am I supposed to do? So it was an interesting halachic discussion, and it was really fun. And for those who are interested, the bottom line is you follow the port that you left from, which we saw also the astronauts when they were going up in space. Like, you're going around and around the world.
Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv all day long.
Right. You actually go with the zmanim, the times of the base that you left from. So that's the actual halachic thing. But I did have, there was a Chabad rabbi that shared a veteran in his community. He introduced the veteran to me, and we had a conversation, and he joined some of my classes online on Zoom. He's from out of state. And then we set up a time to talk one-on-one. And shortly into the conversation, he started sharing some trauma stuff from 25 years ago, and walked through it, and we talked about it. And I asked if I can kind of share an insight. And he said, "Oh, you're just going to say this, this, this." And I said, "Hang on, no, let's step back a bit." And I gave him some Hasidic perspective on what happened to him in that time. And I can't go into the actual details, but gave him a Jewish perspective on life and death, and honoring the lives of people that have passed. And he found a lot of comfort in that. In fact, I heard back from the shliach the next day that he called the shliach and said, 4.5 months of therapy didn't accomplish what an hour and a half with the chaplain did. I didn't share anything the Chabad shliach locally wouldn't say. It's the same stuff that every shliach is teaching. But he wouldn't share his story with a civilian, because civilians wouldn't understand and would get judgmental. And so a lot of the things that I talk about with service members is stuff that they just can't share with a civilian clergy member.
You've talked about how you've been able to help these people, the experiences. How has it changed you? How has it impacted you? How is your life different from having met, counseled, schmoozed, hung out, chatted, taught, listened to this spectrum of people who've served in the military?
So what's funny is that the JLI classes that we teach, you and I teach the same kind of JLI classes, right? But my classes are all veterans or active service members, and the conversations can be vastly different. It's the same topic, right? But they're seeing it from a perspective of someone who served. And for me, that's a really big insight. I think the concept of service beyond self has become much more tangible. And the idea of no, you don't own your own self decisions. You have to answer to a higher authority. And that's been a powerful impact. It's not, a lot of people talk about, wanting to make their own decisions of what they do for themselves and your own autonomy. Well, no, as a Jew, that's not our path. God is in charge, and we belong to him, and we have to follow what he wants. So that's a huge dictate.
Great. Okay, we're going to give everyone a chance if they want to unmute and jump in and ask the chaplain a question. Someone asked a question. Hold on. What do you think the Jewish veterans you serve want us to know about them? Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you.
Yes. So there's someone in my synagogue who, in B'nai Ruvain, there's someone who's a service member there. And it was fascinating because he's very proud of his service, but it never comes up in conversation. And once he started hanging out with me and, you know, he says good Shabbos to everyone that come to shul, he salutes me when I come, right? People see that, right? I was sitting with him at an event on Veterans Day, and people came up, they said, Shalom Aleichem, looked to him, made the connection and said, thank you for your service. Those simple words, they actually mean a lot. That aspect of who they are, that they are service members, they gave up that prime time of their youth, when they're finally out from under mom's apron and before they're attached to family responsibilities, they were totally free and they gave that up to service of something bigger. That's huge. And they're proud of that. And they appreciate the acknowledgement of that, even just to ask, you know, questions about their service, or, you know, or just to say thank you for your service. They do appreciate that because they're very proud of it.
Beautiful. Okay. We want to thank you. If anyone else wants to quickly just unmute themselves and ask a question, otherwise we're going to let the chaplain go. Thank you. Chaplain Grossman, Institute of Jewish Chaplaincy. Really appreciate your time. Tomorrow night, everybody, we'll learn some mimer and we'll see you then. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.